Gentrification is the process in which a poor and usually black neighborhood becomes middle class and largely white. In the past, and in areas today in which it takes place, those that come into the neighborhood with money often force those who already live there to move. They're displaced. When an area is gentrified, it becomes more savory and appealing to those with money. Therefore, the prices of homes and apartments goes quickly up. Homeowners can make a profit selling their houses, but apartment renters must pay increasing amounts of money for their rents, cannot afford it, and are forced to move. Furthermore, entire apartment complexes are sometimes purchased by those looking to develop the land, and those living in them are more obviously forced out. Gentrification starts small, with one or two bold middle-class people moving into an area with different demographics, drawn by the area's diversity and cheap housing. They may open up a restaurant that caters to those of the middle class, and usually white. With that, more people come into the neighborhood, and as more people move in, the area becomes cool, attracting the attention of companies and developers. With this, those who already live there come under great pressure to sell their land and move out. Gentrification is a slow process, generally spanning decades and invisible to most at first. Oftentimes, those who are involved at first are not aware of it. They simply seek to live in an area with culture and diversity. When the area begins to more obviously change, local governments and other major organizations may become aware and attempt to stimulate it, prevent it, or somewhere in between. Each case is different. I will highlight one later on. Residents are often forced to move further and further away from the major city they almost always live outside of, and must leave behind their friends and extended family, often to move into an even worse neighborhood. Many live there their entire lives, sometimes going back generations, and it requires a vast change for each person involved. Gentrification is not all bad, as previously poor and crime-ridden neighborhoods become safe and wealthier. However, these benefits usually apply only to the newcomers. Those who benefit from the original residents are those who sell their houses for vastly more money than they bought them for. There are those with the resources to stay and reap the rewards provided by better schools, infrastructure, hospitals, and parks. If overseen well, as it is in many areas, then very few people are displaced. The government and other organizations provide for them subsidized housing. East Liberty is a neighborhood a few minutes east of the center of Pittsburgh. It is considered to be urban. It is currently undergoing massive changes, exhibited by the vast construction zones, the shiny new Google offices sitting next to empty and deteriorated storefronts, and a look at the attire of those who live there. The streets are shared by shoddily clothed homeless and suit-clad business people. By 1790, the neighborhood was home to white farmers. Within 50 years, it held churches, hospitals, and schools, and a train from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia ran through it. Between the 1860s and 1900s, East Liberty grew to become reportedly the richest neighborhood in America, with racetracks, stockyards, a circus, and a skating rink, and was home to poster children of wealth such as the Carnegie, Heinz, Lockhart, Mellon, and Westinghouse families. World War I and the Great Depression brought economic decline to East Liberty, but it began to grow once again in the mid-1930s. Its 1936 Christmas parade was declared the largest in the nation, exceeding even New York's. It remained a booming business center until about 1958. At that time, the suburbs around the city were growing and putting up tough commercial competition. In response, neighborhood leaders decided to enact a massive and controversial urban renewal project to bring back shoppers. Entire blocks of houses and commercial properties were bulldozed and replaced by a highway-sized road ring called Penn Circle, and vast parking lots around the commercial center. The streets of the business district were converted into a mall. In order to provide homes for all those that were displaced, more than 1,000 apartment rental units were constructed. The new road, Penn Circle, did not accomplish what it was intended to. It instead sent potential customers around and away from the district. This caused business to dry up for the district's store owners, and many other closed or moved. Many families packed up and moved to adjacent neighborhoods or the relatively new suburbs. The new apartment complexes, subsidized by the government, began to fall into disrepair. I might add, Two major reasons that the apartment complexes began to decay is both money and racism. Most of the residents were black, and those who ran them tended to be whites. The white apartment managers continuously found legal loopholes that prevented them from having to repair the buildings, both motivated by money and by race. Most of the wealthy white people that lived in the area moved out. The poorer blacks that lived in the area stayed because they lacked the resources to move. As a result of the government-subsidized apartments and plummeting cost of homes, many of Pittsburgh's poor began to move into East Liberty. It became virtually a black ghetto throughout the 1970s and 1980s. In 1979, the East Liberty Quarter Chamber of Commerce formed the nonprofit East Liberty Development, Inc., ELDI for short, to bring about redevelopment. It enacted various projects, with some succeeding, but was not able to unify and rebuild the neighborhood. In the 1990s, the neighborhood was seen as unsafe, and black and poor residents made up most of the district's population. Things began to turn around in the late 1990s as new leaders decided to tackle the community's problems. They drafted a plan with clear priorities for the neighborhood's future, which allowed them to gain funding and support from the city of Pittsburgh and organizations like the local churches. The ELDI, East Liberty Development, Inc., continues to play a major part in the community. The organization, composed of community leaders, is the visible driving force behind East Liberty's current development. East Liberty was ridden with crime in the 1990s and early 2000s. Community leaders and the well-funded ELDI, which is itself partly led by bank and corporate managers, very wealthy, had been seeking to find ways to lower the area's suppressive crime rate since the 90s. In 2006, they tried a strategy based on the theory that crime came not from the entire neighborhood, nor an entire block, but only from one or two houses on a given street. The ELDI started to purchase slum apartment complexes and brought in, and I quote, proactive property managers to end bad behavior, and backstopped their authority with off-duty police. Crime fell by 49%. As crime fell, more people began to walk outside, and children started to play on the street. Without nearly as much crime, those with resources quickly began to invest in the neighborhood, purchasing and renovating abandoned buildings, over 60 to be more precise. Between 2008 and 2012, the price of homes rose 120%. The ELDI and governments of Pittsburgh and East Liberty purchased homes to be rented out to those with low incomes. There are apartments that are legally required for the next 30 years to provide rental units only to those who make below a certain amount of money. It is different for each case, but you have to make about less than $38,000 a year. Many of these buildings also provide housing to those with middle and high relative incomes. In the words of Miss Dedrick of the University of Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh grows so slowly that gentrification means something different here. The recent stages of development could be a way to reunite neighborhoods that were separated by urban renewal. East Liberty is still majority black, and that has not changed since 2000. It is also composed largely of lower-income residents.
What a wonderful world.